Hello, today I'm doing an overview of some new G303 SE mods from Lethal Gaming Gear. Thank you to them for sending these out, by the way. First up, we have Lethal Skates V2, a new iteration of the glass skates with a couple of key improvements. Firstly, the material itself has been changed to make it a little bit sturdier and more resistant to breakage. On the original, there actually wasn't much of a concern about damage occurring during shipping since the packaging was so high quality and protective. But you could still risk breaking them while trying to remove the skates if glass wasn't quite for you and you want to try something else. But on the new version here, they do flex a little bit and seem to be more forgiving. I actually did have to reset my back skate here because I misplaced it a little bit and it wouldn't quite sit level in the top corner here. So I can personally attest to how easy it was to remove them without any damage occurring and while keeping them usable. All I had to do was just get a knife up underneath the skate where it gives you this notch right here, then slide the knife between the adhesive layer and the bottom of the mouse, basically filleting the skate off, which actually felt surprisingly easy, and the skate was able to flex a little as it started to peel away. Even the adhesive was still usable too. There are some spots where it did get messed up a little bit, like right in this corner here, but it was very easy to stick it securely back to the bottom and it is still completely flat. So if you are careful and use this technique, or maybe get a spudger up underneath the skate in the same way, that should probably work too, you'll be totally fine with removing these and reinstalling them later without any damage. That is not something that you have to worry about when it comes to lethal skates in particular. Also, I should note that the material change doesn't seem to affect the feel at all, and as far as I can tell, they are identical to the touch, so nothing was compromised for this better durability. But what does affect the feel is that the V2 version is far more rounded than the old ones. I was surprised how big the difference was actually, both in-game and while inspecting them. On the old version here, there is a very well-defined ridge right here at the edge of the skate. It isn't sharp or anything, but it is noticeable. But on the new version, it is completely round and very smoothly curves out, far more than the old. And again, it is far more noticeable than I ever thought it would be. It is a huge difference. In-game, the biggest difference between the two is in the smoothness and tactile response. The old skates were already very smooth, that is one of the hallmarks of glass feet, but these new ones blow them out of the water and create the smoothest glide I've ever experienced by far. It is super buttery on every pad because these more rounded edges end up catching less on the weave, and it doesn't quite have that scraping feeling that you would sometimes get on the old skates when you used a more abrasive surface. For example, the Hien here, a very rough, highly textured pad, you can hear a massive difference between the old skates and now the new V2. Back to the old, then again to the new. It's super obvious how much smoother it is, so it does feel much better and is an impressive upgrade. Now, the scraping wasn't necessarily bad though, because it did actually add some feedback when you use these surfaces that did make it easier to control. But the new skates do actually retain some of the texture despite the smoothness. It is still less feedback than the original because there is always a trade-off with extra smoothness, but I much prefer how this feels on these rougher surfaces, because instead of feeling like it is scraping above the pad and just kind of like nicking the top of the surface like it does on the old skates, you instead start to feel the depth of the weave far more, as your mouse smoothly rolls up and down over the bumps, which does feel higher quality and more satisfying. But besides the difference in smoothness and tactility, they perform the same. They both have the incredibly low static friction that makes it easy to get your mouse moving for small correction adjustments, and that also gives your mouse a very fluid feeling that helps your aim to be more effortless and intuitive, now that it is less restrictive for these inner hand motions. They also both retain a high amount of dynamic friction that helps it to still feel controllable and give a good amount of stopping power, much more than you would probably expect out of glass. If you still have questions about how glass feet perform, I would recommend checking out my full video on glass feet here. Everything I said still applies to the V2 version. Now finally, just as a quick note about glass feet in general, I've actually been liking them a lot more now that I have them for the G303 SE. Previously, I thought they had a lot of things going for them, and I did enjoy how they felt, but they were still a little bit too inconsistent to prefer them over PTFE, so the two options felt about even to me overall. But now that I've tried this updated version, and most importantly, now that it is on a mouse with a shape that is much better for me than the GPX, I actually think I now prefer glass feet. For me, these feet now feel way easier to use since the G303 SE is my perfect shape. It already has an excellent feeling of precision and fine control with a good range of motion, so it pairs very well with the low static friction that amplifies your ability to manually control the mouse, and it gives that feeling of fluidity that helps you further utilize this full inner hand range of motion. The G303 is also perfectly stable for me, so these don't feel nearly as shaky, and I overall jitter less, which adds a lot of consistency I felt. Corepads are still going to be my #1 recommendation for everybody. They feel far more universal and are super reliable, but personally I am liking glass more and more and will probably start to utilize them on more mice. So overall, it feels like mouse shape is very important for glass feet, and something that I don't see people talking about as much as I think they should. You really want something that offers a good balance of both stability and fine control to help counteract some of the natural downsides of glass and lean into what it does better than PTFE, that is, amplify your ability to manually control. So, if you can find a mouse that offers this to you, I think it is going to be a great candidate for glass feet. Just be careful because glass feet are never going to be for everyone, even if you do have a great mouse for it, so make an informed purchase decision. Once again, check out my full video on glass feet, I go in way more detail on it. Alright, now onto the Corepad Grips. These felt better than expected, and I've been enjoying them a lot more than I thought I would. So firstly, what makes Corepad Grips cool is that they are pre-cut for you to perfectly fit the mouse's design. On the G303 SE in particular, this is very well done because they fully cover the parts on the side that your fingers make contact with, all the way up this little flat spot here to cover any finger spillover. And then they wrap around back to where you hold the hump in your hand. And of course, they are also perfectly cut to cover both the main and side buttons. So they create perfect coverage of every single part of your hand that actually makes contact with the mouse. They also include this little piece here that is meant to cover the very top of the hump, but I never actually touched that part of my palm, so I pulled it off immediately. It was just pointless. My only actual concern here is that they could have made the side pieces a little bit taller to better accommodate people that place their fingers very low, because if you do start to drag them against the pad, you'll start to fall off the edges of the grips just a little bit. Also, each piece of tape is tapered at the edges, which should help them stay adhered and not peel up with use, and each piece is also quite thin, so it doesn't actually affect the shape much at all. This was something I was concerned about, so I was happy to see that I couldn't really tell a difference in overall grip width. Now, grip-wise, I didn't think that they'd make much of a difference on the G303 for me personally, because I already really liked the coating. This frosted plastic felt incredible on my fingers. But it actually does feel better, surprisingly enough. The texture pattern on the grip and the rubbery finish really locks your fingers in place far more than any coating I've ever experienced, which does work well for the aggressive grip that you get with the G303 SE. Because you don't have to squeeze the mouse quite as hard to maintain the same hand position, which I felt helps your grip to be a little bit more consistent since you don't quite fatigue as much. Plus, they work out very well for my extremely sweaty hands. The color will actually start to darken with moisture, but there is almost zero effect on their actual stickiness, which is pretty cool. So once again, it just makes your grip more consistent and less likely to change, which I always appreciate. Now, overall, I do like Corepad Grips and could pretty easily recommend them. Even on a mouse that already has a great coating for you, they do improve the experience and give the mouse a more reliable feel. I won't be picking them up for every mouse because if the coating is fine, they're not needed really, but I will probably get some for a few mouse I have issues with, namely the NP01 S. I have been using that a lot more recently since I changed up my grip style a little bit, but the coating gets a little bit rough once I get very sweaty, so that could be a great upgrade. And I'll also for sure be getting a set of grips for one other mouse that have been super slippy for me, but I've liked almost everything else about it, so that should be a huge upgrade for that mouse. In conclusion, I liked both of these mods more than I thought they would, and they definitely make the mouse feel better. Neither of them I feel are really required though, because glass feet are still somewhat niche, and I feel your choice between them and PTFE is going to be highly preferential, even despite the improvements made here with the new version. And while Corepad Grips are an outright improvement, I would say, if the coating of a mouse doesn't actively bother you, then they aren't going to be game changing. But if you have a mouse that you really like and want to start using long term, I would recommend that you do start to look into mods like these to help push it as far as you can and improve your experience as much as possible. And Lethal Gaming Gear is the perfect place to start. They have a lot of cool stuff, cannot recommend them enough.